Welcome to the Community Matters Cafe. It's so great to see everybody out here today. So excited myself to be here, and I'll explain more about that in a moment. But my name is Bo Thompson from WBT Radio. So let's get to the big reason that we're here. I want to introduce to you first this guy over here to my right. Matt Doherty is a nationally recognized motivational speaker, best-selling author, media personality, and executive coach. In 2022, he was named the Vistage Rookie of the Year and won the Chair Excellence Award. He guides companies on how to develop leadership skills and team dynamics. Coach Doherty was a starter on the 1982 National Championship team with a guy named Michael Jordan at UNC, along with being the head coach at Notre Dame and also North Carolina. He was named the 2001 Associated Press National Coach of the Year at North Carolina. Matt Doherty. And to my left, a four-time Emmy nominee, a nine-time Emmy nominee. He has 3 times been named the best analyst in college basketball by Sports Illustrated, as well as the ACC Sports Journal and Barrett Sports Media, among other publications. In 2016, Jay Bilas was the recipient of the prestigious Kurt Gowdy Award from the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. The New York Times bestselling author of Toughness, Developing True Strength on and Off the Court. He also writes for ESPN.com and was awarded the Best Column of the Year in 2007 by the United States Basketball Writers Association. A prep All-American from Los Angeles, California, the 6'7" Jay Bilas was a 4-year starter at Duke under Mike Krzyzewski from 1982 to 1986. As an undersized center, he scored 1,062 points, grabbed 692 rebounds, helped lead Duke to the #1 ranking, the 1986 ACC Championship, and the 1986 National Championship game, which I mentioned. Jay Bilas' 1986 Duke team set the NCAA record for the most wins in a single season with 37. Ladies and gentlemen, Jay Bilas and Matt Doherty.
All right. Yeah, man. That's good stuff. Thank you so much for being here. Really excited to have such a great crowd at Community Matters Cafe. And Jay, thank you for being part of this Rebound podcast. I really like to start growing up. What was it like growing up in Southern California? Mom, dad, family, playing sports. Take us back to that time.
In a lot of ways, Matt, it was idyllic. You know, I grew up in a beautiful area of Southern California in Rolling Hills, not far from the Pacific Ocean. My parents had grown up not far from there in San Pedro, California, where the Port of Los Angeles is. And my dad was really hardworking. He had been a commercial fisherman before I was born. And then he got into television sales and service. He was essentially a TV repairman, owned his own business. And so he was his work ethic kind of was a big impact on me. Neither one of my parents had the opportunity to go to college. So when I was growing up, it was always sort of pounded into me that, you need to go to college. And my mom used to say, college of your choice. You need to be a good enough student where you go to the college of your choice. And then I got good at basketball and started getting recruited and realized I didn't need to be as good of a student as my mom thought I needed to be. And that was sort of a point of friction. And she wanted me to go to Stanford, and I didn't want to do that. And oddly enough—
Why didn't you want to go to Stanford?
At that time, Stanford was not considered to be a great basketball program, and it was not, sports were not the Stanford thing. And so I didn't really take to it. But we had my mother and I, the biggest issue that we had with my academics was, I was a good student, but it wasn't my #1 priority. And I had, my junior year, had to take the SAT. And my mom had very high expectations for my score. And I had gone out the night before with my friends. It was a little foggy the next day. And I thought I had done really well. And when we got the result back, my mom was like, this is not going to get into an Ivy League school. And I'm like, yeah, it will, Mom.
Because I can play ball.
Yeah. And so I made her deal. I said, we'll let in some Ivy League schools for home visits, and we'll put the score in front of them. They say it's good enough, then I don't have to take it again. And she's like, she was convinced that it wouldn't be good enough. And I
You
think
you were working on your law degree and your
Yes.
law practice at a very early age.
I just didn't want to take it again.
No kidding.
And so we let in, I think it was Harvard and Brown, and both of them said, "Oh yeah, that's fine." And she was livid. Like there was steam coming out of her ears, and I was looking at her going, like, guess what? I'm not taking again.
So tell us about, like, I love this stuff. I read your book, Toughness, loved reading it, and I love so much about it, but especially the impact your parents made. Your mother put you in some uncomfortable positions.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
My mother was deathly afraid that I would become an uncultured Neanderthal athlete. So I call it, she encouraged me to be in the light most favorable to my mother. She forced me. I had to take ballroom dancing. And when I started doing it,
By the way, I'll never use that against you down the road. I'll never bring that up like over a big putt on 18.
It's
I'll
out
never,
there now. It's out there now, so it's all over. But I showed some proficiency in it, and the teacher that I had was an older lady, but she had been a world-class ballroom dancer. So she paired me with an older girl, and we went around to competitions in Southern California, and we won. And so I had like probably 6 or 7 ballroom dancing trophies that never saw the light of day. Like I kept them in some closet, like I was not telling anybody.
What about your boys? I mean,
I didn't tell any of my friends. So that was a profound secret that I didn't tell anybody. And then,
not that there's anything wrong with that.
but then we
Melissa.
you get into, like, I think I was in 8th or 9th grade, and at school they had this cotillion program. And so every boy and girl had to go through cotillion. And, I had to act like I didn't want any part of it. So they were teaching us how to do ballroom dancing, and I was killing it. And my friends were like, "How do you know all this stuff?" And I was going, "I'm an athlete. How can you not do this? Like, what, are you kidding me?" And just pretended like I didn't know what they were talking about, and then executed everything.
Go to your dad now. Your dad, blue collar, basically TV repairman. And in your book, you talk about the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that story and the impact that it had on you.
So my dad, back then TVs were furniture. You had console TV sets, so he would go on calls and actually do house calls and then take the TV back to the shop and fix it. And he made a lot of money doing that, did very well, and decided that he was going to take the money that he made and invest in real estate. He didn't feel like he understood stock market, stuff like that, but he understood the area he grew up in. So he bought some storefront properties and things like that and tried to put them together. And after a time, in the late 70s, early 80s, his buildings were older, so he had to earthquake-proof the buildings and had to bring them up to California code, and he had me work with him. So I worked on the roofing crews that had to do this stuff, and I was probably 17 years old, and so part of my job, I was the lowest guy on the totem pole, so I would have to carry every morning. I'd have to carry all the materials up from the ground floor up to the roof. And I, being an idiot, I thought, okay, I got to carry all this stuff up. I really don't want to do it. If I carry twice as much stuff, I take half the amount of trips. And so I overloaded myself on one of these trips, and every time I tell the story, I'm higher up on the ladder, but I probably got halfway up the ladder and I fell. I couldn't keep my balance, and I fell dead on my back. And initially my dad, like something happens to your kid, every parent feels this. At first you're like, he was scared that I was hurt. And then when he found out I wasn't hurt, then he was pissed. And so he says to me, and I don't think he felt like he was being profound at the time, but he was. He looked at me and he said, start concentrating on what you're doing. He said, you can't get to the top of that ladder in one step, but you can get to the bottom in one step. Like every step is, basically every step on the ladder was important.
I love that nugget.
Yeah. And I started just kind of thinking about that. Like, your destination may be the top, but what's more important than the rung you're on?
Right.
Doesn't matter the ones behind you or the ones ahead of you. It's the rung you're on that determines, your fate here. And I thought about that quite a bit afterwards. And then I still had to carry all that crap up the top afterwards.
You seem to be getting a little emotional about when you hear that story. Are your parents still alive?
Yes, my dad's 90 and my mom's 87. My dad still plays golf, and He's in really good shape for 90. He can't hear anything, but other than that, he's doing great.
Yeah, maybe that's selective.
I think it is selective. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do those two lessons, your mom putting you in uncomfortable positions, with dance, and your dad with one step at a time on the ladder, how has those lessons helped you with your career, not only at Duke, but as a broadcaster, as one of the best in the business?
I think it came down to handling, they sort of taught me you can handle your own business. You don't have to worry about everything at one time. And my dad used to tell me, when I was playing, I think I had a game one night, and after the game, he could tell that I wasn't fully into it, and he was like, and he never gave me advice on basketball. He stayed completely out of it. He wanted to hear the stories about what happened in the locker room and have a few laughs, but he never critiqued me. He was my dad, not my coach. So after a game, he noticed that maybe I wasn't all there. And he was like, what was going on? And I said, I got this test coming up and this is happening. And he said, what could you do about it while you were playing? And he said, it's okay for you to think about only basketball while you're playing. You can't do anything about that other stuff. So what good does it do you to worry about it? And he said, when it's over, then you can think about the test. And then he goes, when you go out at night with your friends and you put aside a couple hours to hang out and don't think about anything else. But when it's over, you got to move on to the next thing. He was really good at that.
That's compartmentalization and
just
the ability to stay present.
Yeah, present. They call it that now. But he was basically like, concentrate on what you're doing while you're doing it. When you're done, you move on to the next thing. Like he had tasks that he had to do every day. So the night before, and it wasn't like he had some big notebook of things. He had a yellow pad.
Right.
And the night before, he would go to work. He would sit down and he would say, what do I have to do tomorrow? And he would come up with whatever he was supposed to do. And, he wasn't home that much. So when he was at home, I'd be like, come on, Dad, let's watch this, or let's go play catch or do this. And he said, give me a few minutes. I got to do this. I'm like, one time I said, why do you have to do that? And he says, well, because I got to plan for tomorrow. So I can't just wake up and decide what I'm going to do tomorrow. I got to plan it out today. And he wasn't like giving me some lesson. I was bothering him and he wanted me to go away. But, and my mom was kind of the same way. Like she wanted me to, the ballroom dance thing, but she also made me take public speaking courses, which I hated.
Was that Mr. Spidell?
No, that was my basketball coach. Okay. But I had a guy named Billy Kramer.
Oh, Mr. Kramer.
Mr. Kramer.
The forensics class?
Yeah, so my mom put me in this stuff. And I started taking this speech and debate stuff. And then Mr. Kramer got a hold of me and he started taking me to, they called them forensics competitions. And he went from my junior high, just happened to get a job in my high school. So I had him for like 7 or 8 straight years. And so he would take me to these different competitions. And, they called them, there was one that was extemporaneous speaking and impromptu speaking, where they would give you a topic and you had 2 minutes to come up with a speech. Another one, they would give it to you and you just had to start. And, you're 16 years old standing in front of a room with only like 4 judges in the competition. And I don't think I've ever done anything that scared me that much. Mm-hmm. And whether I was in front of the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals as a lawyer or playing basketball, whatever, speaking at an event, that was great preparation on, do this. And if you fall on your face, you got to do it again. And I'm sitting here worried about what these 4 people are thinking. And it's really not that big of a deal, but it was hard when you were doing it. But, having to deal with that and then overcome it, things later on didn't seem like they were as big of a deal after you went through that.
Well, it's funny to, you go into law, you go into broadcasting, you play basketball at a high level, all those lessons that your parents are forcing you to take, which you didn't like at the time, were really beneficial to you.
Oh, hugely beneficial. And, I think my parents always encouraged me. They always let me do what I wanted to do. But my mom especially, my dad, I had certain have-tos at home. I had to cut the ivy and all that stuff, do yard work, which now I will not lift a yard work finger after doing that. But
Wendy's shaking her head. Audience.
She knows from the time we got married. I told her, I promise you, I will make enough money where we'll have a yard service. I am never doing anything.
Yeah, well, I have a green thumb. I'm in the yard all the time, pulling weeds and planting flowers and trimming hedges and stuff. Right, Kelly? Yeah.
Better man than me.
I'm not. I'm not. I'm with you.
But I think like having you do things that are, I'm not sure you need to intentionally make people go outside of their comfort zone, but try it out.
Yep.
And I think my parents had especially my mom had a pretty healthy fear of my failure. But they put me in positions where I could fail so that, you
Yes.
kind of got used to trying things.
Yes. Talk more about that, because I think that is something that people are afraid of failure. And you talk in your book a lot. Coach K says, failure is not a destination, I think was the quote.
Yeah, he got that from the military academy. And, I always, you associated somebody saying failure, you failed at this, as this horrifying thing. And there's a difference between failing and being a failure. Those are two completely different things. And you start thinking about, our experiences playing that, you go into a game and, the goal is to win. Well, if you lose the game, well, you did fail, but you may have played really well and lost. I mean, so you have to be able to deal with the failure and then act on that positively. And I think I learned that, not always. I mean, there were times when you didn't act on it positively because you're immature, but being put in those positions, and you were put in it athletically, but I'm not sure. That's what, honestly, Matt, why I wrote the book called Toughness, is because it was never really defined to us by our coaches. You kind of learned it over the years through osmosis.
Well, we always thought toughness was standing up, physical contact, confrontation in the park or in a game. That's toughness, and a lot of that's fake toughness, right? But you touched on toughness is concentrating on a task, right? Toughness is dealing with failure. What other forms of toughness? And how can people in the audience and the listening audience, business owners, entrepreneurs, how do they carry that to the workplace and build resilient teams? Especially because this generation gets a bad rap, right?
I think so.
And you're working, you see these young people, you have a basketball camp, you're working as an analyst for college basketball, so you see these generations after generations after generations. So talk about toughness, talk about this generation, and talking about building resilient teams.
I think, to your point, I think this generation, our kids get a bad rap, that somehow they're somehow softer than we used to be, or they scroll too much and all that, when we do it just as much as they do. My sense is, and I didn't talk to my grandparents about this, but my sense is that my grandfather, who served in the military, probably thought I was the wimpiest guy that he'd ever met. He fought in World War II, or, was in the Merchant Marine, did all these things. And, his generation ran up Omaha Beach. And I'm sure my dad felt like I had it a lot easier than he did. And I did. But it doesn't mean that the things that I was doing weren't difficult and didn't require me to put myself out there and strive and work and achieve. And I think for our kids, like, I looked at my kids when they were going through the college admissions process, and I was like, look at the pressure that's on them. Yeah. And I didn't feel that kind of pressure. And it wasn't just because we played basketball and got recruited. It was, when I was in high school, my friends, the question we asked each other was, are you going to college? Nobody asked, where are you going? It wasn't like a status thing. And for our kids, if they didn't get into a certain level of school, they felt like they'd failed. And that's not the way it works. I actually, with my son, I had actually showed him, here's a list of CEOs, some of the highest paid CEOs, and here's where they went to school. Like, show me the pattern. There isn't one. Some of them went to small schools, big schools, highly regarded schools.
Didn't go to school.
Some didn't. But to your point on resilient team, I went pretty deep in thinking about what accountability means. And when I was growing up and I would hear the word accountability, you got to be accountable. To me, it was associated with blame. And like, blame is a toxic thing. Accountability is an essential thing. And so when you have clearly defined responsibilities and expectations, And then when you're accountable to those, you accept that this is what I'm expected to do, and you accept that, and you work together with your colleagues. That's a healthy culture. When something happens that's negative, which happens in every team, every organization, you're going to have negative results at times. If it's a blame culture, then you're going to have a bunch of risk-averse people. And I remember one time when I was playing, Coach K, like especially back then, he could be pretty sharp with you. And you go through film session. If you made a mistake, I needed therapy after some of the film sessions. And there was an assistant coach on our team named Bob Bender. And I had been getting it pretty good from Coach K at practice one day. And toward the end of practice, Bob comes up to me. And Bob coached at Illinois State and University of Washington, coached in the NBA for a long time. And he came up to me and he says, "Stop hiding." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "You're playing not to make a mistake so he doesn't jump you." And he said, "Quit doing that. Like, go for it." And he was right. Like I was trying not to make a mistake. And you don't want that. You don't want people to be reckless, but you can't be a risk-averse person all the time because you don't want to be held like, "I'm not going to do that." It's kind of like a line in a movie where somebody said, "Wait a minute, I didn't make that decision. I approved that decision." They're two different things. You don't want that.
So building, obviously Coach K is one of the best of all time. And not only as a basketball coach, but I think a leader of men. And you've seen up close and personal in your profession, coaches after coaches after coaches. You decided to go to Duke when Coach K had a 23-30 record in his first 2 years. Why?
I had a really difficult experience with my high school coach. The high school team that I played on was really good. We had a number of guys that went on and played Division I basketball, and we'd all grown up together. So we played together from fourth grade all the way through high school. So we had a very close-knit group of guys, but our coach just wasn't very good. And he was a nice person off the floor, but we were miserable, and he made us all miserable. And at the end of it—
In what way? How? Like, was it personal, verbal, or was it just apathy?
All of it. It wasn't apathy, but it was all of it. He was underqualified, which you can deal with. That's fine. But he was manipulative. He wanted a team where everybody scored 9 points a game, and he wanted no separation between the players. That's not the way it goes. And we'd have games where if I had 25 points in the first half and we were up 15, I didn't play in the second half. And we were like, really?
Right.
Really? And even to the point, I played with a great player named Dave Butler, who played at Cal and played professionally overseas like I did. And our junior year, we were one of the top teams in Southern California, and he didn't nominate any of us for All-State. And you had to be nominated by your coach. And you're like, what? Like, you didn't nominate us? Like, if we don't get voted for, that's fine. But, you're supposed to be supported by your coach. And he just didn't want accolades for the individuals.
What goes through my mind is I'm thinking about your dad and your mom. Now, today, if that coach doesn't support the play, or the kids either transferring or the parents are going to get them fired, what did your parents do in that situation?
My dad was basically, look, you're going to be somewhere after this. Just manage it and deal with it, and stay away from the things that set him off, and handle it. And I did. But I didn't want that to happen again. So when I was deciding where to go to college, I'm sure people don't like hearing this, but I really didn't care where I went to school. I cared who I played for, because that was more important to me. I was one of those probably arrogant high school kids that I thought all these schools have the same books in the library. I'll be fine. But I wanted, basketball was important to me, so I wanted to be happy in my basketball life. And if I was happy there, and if I find the right person, he'll be at the right school. And so I came down to 4 coaches. I came down to Coach K at Duke, who was the least accomplished of any of the 4, Lute Olson at Iowa, Jim Boeheim at Syracuse, and then Ted Owens at Kansas.
Oh, wow.
And at the end of the—
Did you visit Syracuse?
I did.
Did you?
What
was that like from Rolling Hills, California?
It was brutal. It was brutal, and that made a big difference. But when it came to the end of the recruiting process, you had kind of flirted with everybody, and it's kind of like, I'm sure it was the same for you. You come home from a visit and you're like, oh, I'm going there.
Mm-hmm.
And then time went on and you got a little more rational about it. But when it came down to it, I was basically, I like Coach K the best, and I want to play for him. And it worked out that
it worked out indeed.
Yeah, it worked out really well.
I mean, 4-year starter with Mark Gallery, Johnny Dawkins, and Coach K said Jay and his class of 1986 collectively changed the course of Duke basketball in my career. I was at North Carolina his first year. A couple of years later, I want to say his second year, maybe you weren't there yet, or his third year, they lose to Wagner at home.
Yeah, that was my freshman year.
Your freshman year. Mm-hmm. Lose to Wagner at home, and he gets called into the AD's office, Tom Butters, and he thinks he's going to get fired, and he gets a 10-year extension.
That was the next year. My freshman year, we thought he was going to get fired. So it was what I would consider a toxic atmosphere around the program. And so we were worried. And I remember calling home, and I call my dad, and I go, man, what if they fire him? Like, I'm not staying here if they fire him. My dad would say, will you shut up? Like
But how about that for a dad? Now, Anthony calls home and complains when he's at Wake Forest, your son. And now I know he's graduated from Wake Forest, but how did you parent? How did you parent like your dad? How did you parent when those types of situations?
I listened first and made sure I listened to the whole story. I'm sure Anthony wouldn't mind. My son's name is Anthony, like my father. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me telling you this. So I can't remember this junior year. He called home, and my son was a walk-on, and he wound up being captain of the team. Had 4 great years there playing for Danny Manning at Wake Forest. But they had a game, and Danny and the staff didn't feel like the bench was as into the game as they needed to be. So decided that he was going to leave a couple guys home on the next road trip. And my son was one of the guys.
Wow.
And he didn't leave any of the starters home. He left the walk-ons home. So Anthony said, this is not right, and I want to say something. And so I listened to him. I said, what would you say? And I told him, I said, look, you can do that if you feel like it. If you feel compelled to do it, you can do that. Here's the way I would handle it. You're not going to move your coach with this story. I hate to break this to you, but the coaches aren't staying up at night thinking, do the walk-ons feel fulfilled? They're just not. And if you go in and do that, you're going to make too big a deal out of this. Take it. And no disrespect, but the game was Clemson. I said, you're getting out of a trip to Clemson.
Mark,
that could be worse. So it's not like you're going down to Miami, staying in South Beach, right. Relax. But I handled that.
And they have a nice Holiday Inn in Anderson.
Yeah. And a great sushi restaurant.
Sorry, Mark. Mark McClain played at Clemson.
We all have our crosses to bear.
So, Anthony, so talk about what happened.
He decided not to do it, and it went away. It wasn't that big. It wasn't that big of a deal to the coaching staff. Why make a bigger deal out of it? But my dad, when I called home about Coach K, maybe what if they fire him? He's like, tell me what you can do about that. And his thing was, your job is to play. And whatever happens, you'll deal with it later. You can't do anything about it now, so just play.
I love it. And then your senior year, 37 wins, Final Four, national championship game. Then you went to law school for 3 years, and you were an assistant coach. And Duke went to 3 Final Fours and won back-to-back national championships. So you went from player to on his staff.
Well, I played 3 years overseas first, so I
that's right.
Like both of us, you wanted to play professionally, and after 3 years over there, I thought I would play. It turned out that playing in Italy was my level. I'm sure if I made a team in the NBA, I got drafted by the Mavericks, but I would have been at the end of the bench, wondering if I was going on the next road trip, and so it was really enjoyable for me, Matt. You go. we had somewhat similar, you were a much better player than I was, but we had somewhat similar experiences in that, you leave high school, you're a star, celebrated player in high school. Then you go to college and you're a good role player, like a valuable asset, but it's not like.
Yeah, you're a role player.
Yeah.
Coach Smith one time, high school All-American, go to North Carolina, scored a lot of points in high school. And I tell this story. He comes up, there's Jed Doughton and Richard Venroot, and he, both played at North Carolina. And Coach Smith before practice says, Matthew, I think you could be the best screener in the country. For real. And I'm like, okay, coach, a friend of mine talks about good leadership is manipulation with good intent. So at an early age, I got a sense of all right, coach, I get it. All right. But, I got Sam Perkins. I got, All-American, James Worthy, All-American, Michael Jordan. That's pretty good coaching, as opposed to saying, listen, man, you're getting no shots, set some damn screens, right? So he said it in a very nice way. And I joke and I say, I'd go out to a fraternity party on a Friday night and go up to a good-looking girl and say, I'm the best screener in the country. Got no play. They walked right by me, went to Michael Jordan and James Worthy. But I wouldn't do it any differently, and I don't think you would either.
No.
Right? You could have been a star maybe at another, Stanford, and I could have been a bigger name player at another place, but we did special things with special guys, with special coaches at special institutions.
That's sort of the choice. But, so you leave high school, you do the role player thing, and it was really fulfilling. I enjoyed it. I didn't consider being called a role player an insult.
Right.
Just because you're asked to play that role doesn't mean it's all you're capable of. But after getting out of college and going overseas, I was a star player again, and it was fun. I enjoyed being the center of I'm taking all the shots, and it was really fun. But after 3 years of it, Coach K called me and said, I had applied to law school because my dad said, if you don't get accepted to law school now, you're not going to do it when you're 32 or 33. Do it now and defer it.
Your dad was a good man.
Yeah, he's smart. And so I did it. I took the law school admission test when I was I had to fly to Spain to do it. And I took it in Air Force Base and did well enough where I could get into law school. I applied to Duke, and I was thinking, okay, maybe I won't get in. And if I do get in, I can defer it and play 6, 7, 8 more years in Europe and make some more money and all that. And Coach K calls me. He heard about the application, so he calls me and says he offered me a coaching job as a grad assistant. And he was the one that said, if you get into law school, will you go? And I said, well, I want to keep playing. And he want to continue my professional career. And he said, no, I get that. And he says, I just don't know that this offer is going to come around again. I was like, oh, geez. And I thought
manipulation with good intent.
Yeah.
Right?
And I thought maybe I should take this.
They were more similar, Coach Smith and Coach K, than different.
Yes.
The packaging was a little different.
Just different personalities, but they had the same core principles.
That's right.
I think. And so I took it and did law school and basketball at the same time. And I really thought coaching was the path I was going to take. But it didn't turn out that would be, when my wife Wendy and I, we got engaged, and we didn't think that would be the best sort of family path for us.
Oh, no, it's a great family path. Right, Kelly? Yeah, lovely. Yeah, good decision, Wendy.
She didn't want to move. She didn't want to move as much as I was willing to.
Yeah, well, she's a smart girl.
She was right.
Yeah. So you're on the staff, 3 Final Fours, 2 national championships. Mm-hmm. What was it like? I when I went to work for Roy Williams at Kansas, I got now behind the curtain of Coach Smith's program. You see it and feel it one way as a player when you're 18 to 21, 22, and then you're older, more mature, more experienced, and now you get to be in the meetings. You get to see him before games, after games, planning practice, watching film. What popped out to you like, oh, that's the method to his madness, or that's why he did things, or, oh, wow, this is really unique, really smart. I didn't realize that as a player. Anything jump out during the course of your time being an assistant coach?
A lot. lot. I think the first thing that jumped out was the level of detail and the depth of scouting that Coach K and the staff did. And then the difference between what the staff was prepared for and what they shared with the players. And Coach K, what I believe one of his greatest strengths is taking the complicated and making it simple. And so we would boil down a game plan. All right, here are the 4 things we need to do. We don't need to stop every action that they have, and we don't need to get bogged down in those details. If we take away this pass, this entry pass, and push it out 2 feet, or if we can deny this reversal on this action, we can blow this whole thing up. Stuff like that, this whole particular play. But he would give us 3 or 4 things on offense and defense that we needed to concentrate on. The rest of it was going to be based on our principles. And it made it easy and digestible for us, that we could act on it, that we weren't overburdened with too much information. He had it, right, but we didn't need that level of having everything. And then the other part were the interpersonal connections on the team that he was always cognizant of. Is that this player's going through this? There's something going on between these 2 guys. We need to address that. And he was really good at jumping on something that was seemingly small while we were winning, that if he didn't jump on it now, it was going to become a bigger issue and cost us later.
Can you give me an example? Give us an example of that.
He was a big body language guy.
Oh, yeah. 50% of communications, body language.
Really big. And
I say that all the time.
But you're right. And but sort of the body language that a player would exhibit that would send messages to his teammates and then to the opponent. And when Bobby Hurley was a younger player, my first year as an assistant was his first year. And when I had heard so much about Bobby, I wasn't part of his recruiting process, but I had heard, man, this guy is going to change everything here. And the first couple of weeks of practice, I was like, man, the old man snapped his cap. Like, this guy's a whiny little.
The old man snapped his what?
His cap.
His cap.
At first I didn't really care for Bobby.
Right. No, listen, nobody did. Yeah. He had a sourpuss. Especially if you're a Carolina guy. You hated the guy. That's a recruiting story. He wanted to go to Carolina. No.
We all did.
But you've heard it. And Coach waited on Kenny Anderson and Mr. Hurley and, didn't want to wait. And anyway.
But
But he was always
very
looked
fiery.
Unhappy.
Yeah, always looked unhappy, would react to everything. And Coach K sat him down and showed him his body language, says, you can't do this. That, how do you think your teammates are reacting to, now they're worried about you. And the opponents are going, okay, we got him now. You're not projecting strength and all that. And he didn't wait until because Bobby was unbelievably good. I mean, you had to have him out there. But he would jump on those little things, little details he would make a big deal out of, and he would rock the boat when we were winning. He wasn't afraid to do that. And a lot of coaches don't want to rock the boat, but if you don't jump on it, then later on, that's a reason you may lose, and then the boat gets rocked for you.
Yeah, Jeff Van Gundy has a great quote, don't accept in victory what you wouldn't accept in defeat.
Right.
And that's basically what you're saying, right? And so everybody here, goes on a hot streak, right? Through the pandemic, a lot of people had great success during the pandemic because there was extra money and all of a sudden they get the wind at their backs and then things start to tighten up. And maybe during that period, you allowed people to loaf. You allowed people to show up late. You allowed maybe the detail in the reports weren't as sharp. But that's when you tighten the screws. That's when the great teams tighten the screws.
Well, and you know this better than anybody. Like, the margin of victory is so slim in these games. So you have the same performance in 2 different games, exactly the same. You win one because the last shot goes in, and magically the last shot going in washes away the mistakes. You lose that game, the shot doesn't go in, and then every mistake is magnified. And the truth lies in the middle. So can you address those mistakes when you're winning rather than overdo it when you're losing, sort of magnify it too much. And Kevin Eastman, who's been a mentor of mine for a long time, and Kevin had a saying. He was like, "Catch him doing something right." That coaches would oftentimes they're very good at being critical of mistakes.
Coach Smith would say, "Praise the actions you want repeated."
Exactly, praise the action you want to repeat it, but catch them doing something right. And we didn't do everything wrong, but I think going back to resiliency, part of it is resiliency and accountability. For me, part of it is being tough enough to accept critique and being able to act on it positively. So when you get feedback, and how it's delivered is important. Sort of the blame versus accountability thing. But are you willing to accept that and then say, okay, I made a mistake here. I didn't do my best here. And then use that to act positively on it? Or is it going to be something where you feel attacked or you're going to
when you were a player, you and I have shared stories on the golf course. Like, I don't think Coach K or Coach Smith at times really cared what we thought when they were critiquing us on the court, right?
No.
Yeah. Like Coach Smith sometimes just said, Doherty, Exum changed, God rest his soul, Cecil Exum had just passed away. But the worst thing he never cursed, but he would say to me, Doherty, Exum changed jerseys, which was basically, I was demoted to the second team. I know Coach K's, was maybe a little more aggressive with his comments. How should the people in here and the listening audience that are running companies hold people accountable, address it, deliver that news? Because I think that's the hardest thing. Talk about driving a culture. You gotta have core values. You got to set a list of the behaviors that are important to the program, and then you got to hold them accountable. Well, the first two are easy. We can have fun with core values and behaviors, but now all of a sudden, Allery and Dawkins don't show up on time for the bus. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that story.
Yeah, that was my freshman year on the way to the ACC tournament. We were freshmen. We each had a fellow teammate as a roommate, and we were expected. The bus leaves at whatever time, 9 in the morning or 8:30. And Allery and Dawkins are roommates in the dorm, and they're not on the bus. So Coach K said, the bus leaves at X time. We're leaving. You're either on the bus or you're not. So it makes it sound like we just went to the airport and flew to Atlanta, but he had one of the assistants get off the bus and go get him. But their alarms didn't go off and they just overslept. So when they finally got there, he sat the team down when we got to Atlanta and we went over the fact that these guys were late. So he like, how do you blame two guys, especially your two best players? Their alarm didn't go off. I mean, that's going to happen. So he looked at the rest of the freshmen that were in their dorm. We were all on the same floor in the dorm. And he said, what did you guys do? Did you guys make sure that all of you were going to get there? Like, what responsibility do you take for all of us being on time? And he asked us the question, and we started saying, well, geez, we could have done that. We walked right past a closed door at their room. None of us thought maybe we should knock on their door. We were all into ourselves. Like, I got to get there on time. And so he's basically asking us, like, you need to take responsibility for each other and put it on all of us for them being late. And that way you can still start them. Maybe that was part of it. He didn't have to take them out of the lineup.
It's funny.
Yeah.
If you overslept or somebody else on the team, I was always worried about missing the practice. But, like you said, sometimes other guys showed up late and they didn't miss quite as much time that I would have missed.
Yeah,
but,
you found out that there's such a thing as brownie points,
yeah.
And the better players had a few more.
Yeah, well, talk about again, the adversity, building resilient teams. How did Coach K do that? How can we do it in the workplace? Because that is something, again, going back to the accountability part. You have your core values, you have your behaviors, then holding somebody accountable. People show up late to work. People aren't meeting quotas. What's the secret? What do you think is important for the audience to pick up maybe from you and or Coach K?
I think any team I've ever been on, and I don't mean team in just a sports context, is when I've been working as a lawyer, or the team I'm on now, the broadcast group I work with. It's sort of a collective responsibility and making sure that we understand and care for the different roles that people have. That, when I was playing, like Johnny Dawkins was our best player. And that was a responsibility, honestly, that I couldn't fathom when I was playing with him. It was one of those things, and maybe there was a feeling you had too, like, if I didn't play well, we still won. Right. Johnny didn't play well, we did not win.
He was a great player.
And he had he had a responsibility that was of a different level than my responsibility. And I respected that. And I appreciated what he did, but at the same time, like, he appreciated what I did. And when you have that, when players or colleagues of yours are making sacrifices, you have to honor that.
How did that show up? How did he show that appreciation?
He would praise the things that you did well in a game when he's being interviewed afterwards. So they go to the star player for the interview. He made sure to shine a light on the things his teammates did that put us in a position to win.
Do you think that was the way he was, or is that something that Coach K encouraged?
I'm sure there was part of both. But I think he was like that as a person. He's a great teammate, but it's just
not great shaking hands before games.
But it was
that's
meaningful.
A little inside joke that.
But it was it's really meaningful when your teammates have a positive word for you and are appreciative.
It's James Worthy. We're playing an ACC tournament in 1982, Triangle and 2 by Jim Valvano, your favorite coach, Bo. And who do they leave open? Me and Jimmy Black. Okay, so we got to make some shots. James Worthy comes to me in a dead ball situation and says, when I get the ball, I'm going to throw it to you and you shoot it. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. That meant more to me than if Coach Smith said it to me, right? Like you said. The support of a teammate, the culture that is driven by players. And I think that you talk about Leitner holding Grant Hill accountable in your book, Toughness. Touch on that a little bit, because Grant wasn't a great outside shooter at the beginning. And I think Leitner basically said, you got to take the ball to the basket. And that was more powerful coming from Leitner than it was from a coach.
I think so. And I think Christian had a very keen understanding that Grant was the difference between, Final Four caliber team and a championship team. Duke didn't win one until he got there. It was 1991 and Grant was a freshman. And I happen to think Christian Leitner is one of the best players, if not the best players ever played there. I happen to think Grant Hill's the best player to play at Duke. It's amazing how good he was. But he didn't see himself that way. He's a very humble, kind of person, and he wanted to fit in. And Christian was like, no, like, take over, and wanted him to be more aggressive. Like, we need you to do this. And, Coach K was that way too. He would every once in a while, it happened on different teams, he would ask the team, he said, are you guys okay with Grant shooting? And they would all go, yeah. And he said, then shoot it. He never did that with me, oddly enough.
No. Set a screen.
Yeah.
Are you okay with Jay rebounding? Yes, well, rebound.
Yeah. Hey, Jay, if you ever find yourself open with a clear shot, call timeout.
All right. This will go back to 1982. I mean, I was a good player. I thought I was a good player. And I take an open 15-footer in practice. Coach Smith blows the whistle. Who on Matthew's team thought that was a good shot? Raise your hand. And I'm standing next to James Worthy and his nickname Stick. I said, Stick, like help a brother out. Nobody raised their hand. Brutal manipulation with good intent, although that didn't feel like good intent. Right?
Well, I got it after a while. You realize that these guys should be taking more shots.
Yeah. As we get older, like, yeah, that was pretty good coaching.
Yeah. I kind of get it now.
That you talk about adapt and overcome. You went on a trip to the Middle East as part of Operation Hardwood. And I think we all are blown away by men and women in the armed forces. Anybody in here serve in the military, please raise your hand. Stand up, please. Richard, thank you very much, Raph. 2 Tar Heels, by the way. Raf's a Tar Heel. Richard Venroot played for Coach Smith at North Carolina and was the mayor of Charlotte. Another attorney. We have a lot of attorneys. Anyway, thank you for serving. Adapt and overcome. Talk about that.
I went on a trip in, I think it was 2005 and 2006. I went twice to the Middle East during the Iraq War, Operation Iraqi Freedom. And I went with a group of coaches, and we each had a team, a different team from a branch of the military or camp from Afghanistan or Iraq or Kuwait. And we were at Camp Arifjan in Kuwait in a very Spartan gym. And these military groups had come in from all over the Middle East to play in this tournament that was set up for them. And, whether it was Gary Williams or Dave Odom was on the trip when he was in South Carolina, Tom Izzo, ton of great coaches, Kelvin Sampson. We each had a team. And when we first got our teams together, we would have practice time. And one of the coaches, I think it was Dave Odom, decided, why don't we just sort of take some time with each of our teams and then scrimmage and put our stuff in while we're going 5-on-5. And the scrimmages got really heated, and bodies were flying. These soldiers were going after each other, and some of them were high school level players, maybe could have played after high school. Some of them were less than that. And every time there was a collision, when we were playing, on the playground, that might have started a fight. And Dave was the one that pointed out, he goes, look at this. He goes, there are no officials out there. And these guys are fouling each other like crazy, and nobody's saying a word like they were. Those were some tough dudes, man. But in our time off, we were toured around this gigantic military base, and there was a sign that said, adapt and overcome. And so some of the soldiers that were hosting us were explaining to us kind of what that meant, that they had missions that they were going to have obstacles, and too bad, like adapt to it and overcome it. We have a mission. And one of the most profound moments was we were on a little kind of sprinter bus, and they were touring us around something. I think we were going to some tank unit, and we drove tanks around. It was really irresponsible of the military to put Gary Williams in a tank. Rick Barnes, too. There could have been talk about an international incident. So we drove past this row of flags. There's an American flag and some different flags. And some of the flags were of different colors. And just, like maybe a red flag or a green flag, something like that. So one of the coaches says, what do those flags represent? And one of the soldiers says, those, and very matter-of-factly says, those are our heat orders. And it's like 115, 120 degrees there during the summertime. And so we asked him to explain, and he said, well, if it's a certain color of flag, that might mean 20 minutes on, 40 minutes off. So they're working out in the sun for 20 minutes, and they have to take 40 minutes to go in a tent or inside to get out of this, life-changing, life-threatening heat. So what are the different levels of flags? And if I remember right, there was a black flag that meant you were 10 minutes on, 50 minutes off. And one of the coaches says, well, how do you get your work done that way? And he says, well, respectfully, I say this, we don't heed that order. And he was like, you don't follow that order? He goes, we got brothers and sisters dying up in Iraq. Wow. We're not taking 50 minutes off.
Wow.
And you're like,
those of you in the front row may be able to see Jay, don't mind me sharing, getting emotional about that. I mean, that is powerful stuff. And
well, it's a level of commitment that I can't relate to. I never served. Yeah. I've never made a commitment that profound.
And you were tough. You were a tough basketball player. You show toughness. You show grit. You wrote a book about toughness. That's a different level.
That's a different level. And one of the soldiers had talked about, there's a level, the highest non-commissioned officer, I think was called the sergeant major. And the respect that the soldiers had for this sergeant major was off the charts. I couldn't believe it. And we asked somebody about him, and he talked about the reason they respected him so much he had incredibly high expectations, but he really cared about them.
cared.
And his thing was, they said, there's a big difference between being in charge and being a leader. And the point that soldier made was, that guy's a leader. We've had a lot of people in charge.
Repeat that. There's a difference.
There's a difference between in charge and being a leader.
How about that?
And that guy's a leader. I remember the soldier saying that.
You take one nugget away from this podcast, and today's that's a strong nugget. Besides the book Toughness, what's your favorite book? What book had the biggest impact on you that you can remember?
Biggest impact of a book.
There were a lot of books in the Duke Library, right?
Yeah. Most of them you have to color in. The book that, the best basketball book I've ever read is actually Coach Smith's book, Multiple Offense and Defense. I read that in the late 80s, and it changed the way I looked at basketball. I didn't really...
No kidding.
That's absolutely true. I didn't really realize that Coach Smith was probably ahead of the curve in analytics.
Yes, he was. I'm going to interrupt. Halftime, I don't know, Richard, when you were playing, Jed, when you were playing, but halftime, we'd come in and talk about points per possession. And the next day in a film session, points per possession. We were all like, and I like math. Like, I was pretty good in math, but like points per, come on. Like, and explain it, now with the 3-point shot and offensive rebounds. And then I'm working for the Pacers several years ago, and all this analytic. Now that's a stat, like a regularly produced stat, right?
Yeah.
That everyone's talking about.
And I don't think I had ever read before that or heard somebody say that the perfect possession is to get fouled.
Yeah.
If you get fouled every possession, you're going to shoot free throws. That's the most efficient place to score on a basketball floor. And it just opened up a different view of the game. I don't think there's been, most of the things that have sort of inspired or motivated me have been from people saying something to me. That's been like the group of mentors I've had, whether they knew they were a mentor or not, was probably the most impactful for me. People who took the time to help you.
Like who?
Well, my junior basketball coach, when I was playing from 4th through 8th grade, a guy named Dick Spidell.
Yep.
Some of the stuff that he would say, like, I don't know how much I really believed in myself until he believed in me. And, Coach K was a huge one. And then when I got to become a lawyer, Moore & Van Allen, there's the managing partner of my law firm is a guy named Ben Hawfield. And maybe the smartest person I've ever been around. And he was sort of the one that told me and showed me that, one, like we had a case together once, and we were dealing with lawyers across from us that I didn't think were the sharpest tools in the shed. And I thought that gave us a big advantage. And he said, no, it doesn't. And he says, you want to go against smart people. They know what a good deal looks like. And he said that's the most important thing, is when you're dealing with smart people that understand what's going on, that's when you have the chance to really accomplish something. And he was really good with, you tend to think that in a law firm, the end of the year, compensation's a big deal. Everybody seems to be fighting for their slice of the pie. And Ben was really good at making sure that people knew how much he valued the contribution. And said one time, he says, the compensation piece is not as big a deal as you think. And he says, everybody wants to be valued the right way, but what they really want to do is feel valued. And
amen, man.
He was really good at that.
Amen, right? That's one of probably the Gallup polls, one of the number one reasons why people leave their place of employment. They don't feel appreciated. That's powerful.
It's not hard. It's not hard. It's kind of the catch them doing right something. Compliment people when they're doing something well, and make their contribution feel as valued as it is. Because if you take away that contribution, like I sat next to this is several years ago before I wrote this book, I was traveling down to Orlando to do a basketball clinic. And my ticket got screwed up, so I'm sitting in the back of the plane. I'm feeling sorry for myself.
Not in first class.
Not in first class.
Wow, slumming it.
And you know how when you're sitting there and there's an open seat next to you.
Oh yeah, praying nobody takes it.
And then you see a guy
acting like you're sleeping.
You see a guy coming down the aisle, and this big dude is sitting next to me. And this happens. Guy sits next to me, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to be And turns out, we start talking. And I'm usually not a talker on an airplane. To me, an airplane is a flying bus. I want to get off it and get out. And so we start talking.
Duly noted.
Yeah.
Duly noted.
We start talking, and he says, why you headed to Orlando? I said, well, I'm actually going down to a basketball clinic there. And I said, how about you? And he says, I'm going down to watch the space shuttle take off. And I go, oh, that's great. Like, you had an interest in that for a long time? He goes, well, actually, I'm the head of the space shuttle program at NASA. I'm going.
And you didn't want to talk to him.
And you're sitting in coach? I would have thought you guys had some vehicles to get you down there. So it turns out he's a big Kentucky basketball fan. He's asking me all these Coach K leadership questions. Meanwhile, I want to know about NASA.
Right.
So I asked him.
You wrote about this in your book.
Yeah, I asked him. His name's Gerald Woods. We become friends, and so I asked him, like, what's the biggest leadership challenge you have? And it was really an amazing conversation to listen to. He says it's really getting the people who are in charge of these different elements of the space shuttle, understanding that they're part of a bigger whole, that they tend to get siloed, that their element of the shuttle is all that matters. So if you're in charge of the guidance system or the rocket booster system or whatever it is, I don't even know all the things I'm talking about here, but
you're on a roll.
But he says he would, and I said, well, how do you deal with that? He says, I go to them and I tell them, your element will not fly by itself, but the shuttle will not fly without your element. You start thinking about that.
Repeat that. I love that quote. Go ahead.
Your element will not fly by itself, but the shuttle will not fly without your element.
Right.
Like basically you're part of a bigger whole and you're part of a bigger team. And so he came up with this saying. I was like, how do you get that across? And he came up with a saying, responsible for the element, accountable to the mission.
Responsible for the element.
Responsible to the element, accountable to the mission.
Wow.
And I started thinking about like,
wow.
To me, that like kind of translated really well to man-to-man defense. So, I can be fooled into thinking that my man is the most important thing. If I stop him from scoring, I did my job. Right. Meanwhile, somebody behind me is laying the thing in. And we got scored on.
Right.
Your guy didn't score, but we got scored on. So what were you accountable to making sure that we didn't get scored upon, or were you just responsible for your thing alone? And it was, I really thought about that when you're on a team or a member of a team, everybody has a selfish, sort of selfish nature in a way. But when you throw yourself into what the team is doing and you're accountable to what the team is doing, I tend to think your individual performance gets better. But that made a big impact on me, sort of responsible to the element, accountable to the mission.
Powerful nugget. Last question. I know a lot of people may want to ask this question. College athletics, crazy right now. I mean, realignment, transfer portal, NIL money. Where are we going? What's the future look like? What is the new president of the NCAA? What's he doing to right the ship?
I think we're headed to a better place because the landscape is becoming more honest. We have been in a dishonest business for a long time and a hypocritical business, truthfully. I've been hesitant to use that term hypocritical over the years because it sounds incendiary and people get upset when they get called hypocrites. But I would use the word there are a lot of contradictions in college athletics. But from the time we were in school, when the last Supreme Court case came down and schools could basically make as much money as they want, be on television whenever they want, this has been a professional industry, professional sports industry. It's like a multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry that where all the members of the association are individual market competitors, and the only time they act in concert is to collude to limit what athletes can get. That's really the only time they agree to anything. And what's happening now is just the latest in this. So when you and I played in the ACC, I get this question a lot. They said, boy, it must really frustrate you to see the ACC going through this. So they've been going through it for 30 years. Like when you and I played, there were 8 teams in the league. So we played 14 conference games. So you had 7 home games, 7 road games. And we were both the same in this. 5 of our road trips were by bus. We flew to Maryland and we flew to Georgia Tech, and that was it. Everything else was by bus. And, you know, that was what people like to think college sports was. Florida State came into the ACC in 1991 or so, 1990. Then they raided the Big East and brought in, you know, Virginia Tech and Miami and all these places. They take Louisville, Boston College, Syracuse, Pittsburgh, and now your road trips are Syracuse, Miami, and now they're talking about bringing in Stanford and Cal. And we're going to say, oh, this tiny little enterprise of college athletics, you know, it's all about education. It's certainly about education. It's about student athlete welfare, but that's not number 1 and 2. Number 1 is money. It's money. And that's okay. It's America. I don't have any problem with how much coaches make. I don't ever have any problem with how much athletic director make as much as you can, but the athletes have to be cut in on it. And if you don't like it at your school, the doors to Division II and Division III are wide open. But if you're going to play this, like if you're a player that went to USC 2 years ago, you're going into your junior year. Maybe you went there because, well, I grew up in LA. My parents can see me play. They can make a road trip up to Stanford and Cal and get up to Oregon and Washington. They can't go to Rutgers and Penn State and Michigan State and Michigan. And their deal is materially changed. And then they're going to be told, well, you can't transfer unless you sit out a year. Like, really? I think we're headed in a better direction because it's becoming more of an honest proposition. They can't control the money that goes to players. They think they can, and they can't. And so now what the NCAA is doing is they're lobbying Congress for a federal law that's going to allow them to limit what athletes can earn. And
that goes back to when they did that when I was an assistant coach at Kansas,
exactly.
The restricted earnings coach. That lasted like a year.
That was an NCAA. So that's exactly right. You're exactly right. So it's on.
This is a federal law.
There's a federal law. So that was what happened then was a federal antitrust violation. And it should have told the NCAA that we don't have much longer to do this. The courts are catching up with us. So they lost the most recent antitrust case, the Alston case, and got obliterated. They lost 9-0 on the Supreme Court level. And Justice Kavanaugh's concurring opinion basically said, you're not above the law, NCAA. And they sent the message, you bring this back to us, we're going to slap you down again.
Wow.
And so now it's going to be player compensation. The only thing that can save the NCAA is Congress saying, all right, we will give you an antitrust exemption so you can, with our blessing, violate federal antitrust law. I think it's a long shot that it happens, but they're going to have to start signing players to contracts. They're going to
it needs to be more structured.
It'll be structured.
The NBA's doing it.
It'll be structured,
right? Yeah.
But the NBA's collectively bargained, and so when they have a union, and when people say, and it's usually to say there should be a limit. You know, the NBA limits salaries. Yeah, they do, but they bargain with the players. The players agree to it, and the NBA players take 50% of revenue.
Yeah.
Like you want to give college athletes 50% of the revenue? They don't want to do that. No. Right now, college athletes would be cheap if they just signed them to contracts.
Yeah, cheap labor.
They'll do it eventually.
Wow. Let's give Jay a round of applause. Thank you very much.